The Dr. Taz Show, the podcast. Dr. Taz, Superwoman Wellness. Here's Dr. Taz.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Superwoman Wellness, where you know I'm determined to bring you back to your superpowered self. We are about to embark on a conversation that couldn't be more timely, more important than ever before, and I'm so glad that we are actually going to open this door. Joining me today is Jelani Memory. Jelani has quite a story that I'm going to let him tell you, but he founded a kids book about, which launched with his own book, a kids book about racism. Growing up Black in Portland, Oregon, the whitest city in America. I'd probably fight you on that one. But anyhow, Jelani defied the odds and became the most popular kid in school and was a star athlete in basketball and soccer. What started as a small passion project is now a series of books centered around important topics like racism, feminism, body image, cancer, belonging, and gratitude. The brand launches 24 new books every year and has propelled Jelani into a best-selling author. Welcome to the show. So honored to have you. I was already commenting on how your timing is impeccable. Tell us what inspired this. And your first book, I think, was a kid's book about racism, correct?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. And, it's just been a thrill. One, to have made that first book for my kids, a kid's book about racism, for my own 6 children, as a way to keep that conversation going in our home, so that it didn't feel inappropriate or one they couldn't bring up, that one that they knew they could have openly with my wife and I. But beyond that, to watch that book go into so many different homes, families, communities, truly all over the world, as a way to kickstart that very sort of difficult but important conversation between kids 5, 6, 7, and 8, and their grown-ups, whether that's a parent, teacher, grandma, grandpa, auntie, or uncle. And to go beyond that and started a company around the book, really tackling these other topics like feminism or anxiety or adventure or change or death or cancer. These important, challenging, empowering conversations has been remarkable. And we've been able to give this platform to a number of underrepresented individuals, to tell their stories and to really, truly change kids' lives.
Oh my gosh, what important and incredible work. I would love to know why you wrote a kid's book about racism, a little bit about your story. I grew up in the South and I was one of a few of my color and kind in my school. So I know a little bit about racism, and I know that you have a similar story. So tell us kind of where that book came from, and then we can talk about some of the others in just a second.
Yeah. So back in 2018, I found myself with 6 kids, 2 biological, 4 step kids. So 4 white, 2 brown. And we were talking about race, culture, color, and racism quite frequently. And I think, as any dad would want to do for their kids, I decided to take on a cool project to make a book that just exemplified the conversation that I was already having with my kids and make it just for them. So I wrote it in a week, I designed it in a week, and I printed all of 1 copy. That was all it was ever supposed to be. Showed it to my kids, and they were the first ones that helped me understand the power of it, I think, and also the possibilities of it. So, my stepkid Joy, she said, "This is awesome. Can I make a book too?" And I thought, whoa, sure, why not? What would you want to make a book on? And she said, "I'd love to write a kid's book about divorce." And I thought, whoa. And all of a sudden I realized a handful of things: that she had already taken my book and extended it into a series, right? A kid's book about,
right.
But she had also decided that what she would write on was also a difficult and challenging topic to talk about. And when I asked her why she wanted to do that, she said, "Because I want other kids to know what it's like before they go through it, if they ever have to." And ultimately, all of our books, as we've expanded them out, act in this way of starting some of the most important conversations between grownups and kids, and creating that safety and security, I think, for kids to know and to understand in a way that's appropriate for them, but doesn't restrict the conversation completely from them, which is, I think, of what a lot of adults do is they
Mhm.
say, I'll tell you when you're older, you're not ready yet, it's not appropriate for
Right.
you, can we talk
Right.
about this later? And the reality is kids are ready.
Yeah.
Kids are ready for these conversations. It's adults who need to sort of jettison their fear and step up to the plate and really engage with their kids where they're at. And so our books become this bridge between grown-ups and kids to do that.
When is the right time to have some of these tough conversations? If we're, I think racism and, you have to be under a rock to not see the conversation emerge around racism over this last year, right? So every child was
Yeah.
asking about it. It was in every classroom, every, conversation was around that. But what is the right age? I think many people want to preserve the innocence of a child, right? You want to, or there's the reverse where you want your values to be really firmly entrenched first before
Sure.
they go out and get information from elsewhere. When do you start having some of these tough conversations?
Well, the first thing I'll qualify with is that every kid and every family is different, and I would never presume on another family or another kid what they have to do or what they have to not do. So, with that qualifier in place, I think it's really important that parents and grown-ups don't assume more innocence or more naivete than their kids actually have.
Hmm.
So by the time kids start school and they're going to school with kids who look different from them, talk different from them, have different cars, homes, shoes, and different skin color than them, they start to make assumptions, judgments. They start to form ideas. They start to actually have conversations around race. And so imagine as a parent deciding that you're not even going to talk about that for
Right.
your 5, 6, 7-year-old. They're going to start talking with other folks about it. And often that's going to be other 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And so I sort of implore parents to go, don't you want to be a part of that conversation? And then once you're a part of that conversation, then it's what do you talk about? And I'm a big fan of sort of meeting kids where they're at developmentally. And that means actually that a lot of these conversations start a lot sooner than you think they would. So
Hmm.
kids as early as 1 and 2 start to ascribe judgment and sort of value to different skin colors, even
Wow.
before they can talk. Just developmentally, they do that, right?
Why? Like,
Um,
why? What are we doing? What are we doing that's making that happen?
So I don't think it's actually anything we're doing at that age. It's actually just a form of tribalism that ends up happening where kids who are very, very young, sort of 1 and 2, they sort of go, folks who are like me are sort of good and safe and right. And folks who are not like me are not good and safe and right. And of course, biologically, that means they're family, right? You want little kids that age to feel
Right.
safe with their family. And so that means there's a few things. It's not that we want them to not recognize those differences. It's that we want them to start to assign the right sort of value to those differences, which means you don't judge somebody because they have different skin, but you also can recognize they have different skin. And here's what that means. And so that conversation, 3 and 4, talking about race, feeling comfortable to let kids point out race and notice it and start to have a conversation about that. And then by the time they're 4, 5, and 6, then racism becomes a reality. And I say for kids of color, they are directly experiencing racism. And so that conversation often starts in families of color very early as they start to make sense of that for kids who are having negative experiences around racism. But for often white parents, they're avoiding having the conversation. And what happens when you protect your kid's innocence along with that is that they end up becoming the perpetrators of
Mm.
that value difference judgment, right? So they're the one touching the kid's hair, calling out the difference and saying that they're bad or calling them names, assuming that it is just playful banter or there's not a big issue
Right.
behind it or that it's not hurtful or damaging. And my ask or my question to white parents is, would you rather have the conversation with your kid or have them be the perpetrator of that thing that you'd be horrified if you were in the room with them while they're at school or with a friend, of them saying something as if race is not a part of their life or their everyday.
Wow. And I mean, you've seen this, I've seen this, and I've seen it with my children, that knowledge or that sense of we're different. This is, this person's this way, that person's that way. It starts really early. You know, can we educate our kids how to handle that? How do you handle that when you're feeling a certain way? in the classroom or when you're feeling a certain way? And for white parents too, how do they handle that? How do you open that door? What do you say about race? Do you just say people are different, different colors, everyone's equal? Is there a way to get this message across? And I'm sure it's in a kid's book about racism, but is there a way to get this message across for a child to understand that's not just words on that not just a lot of empty words that they don't understand?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to recognize that kids are curious, they're creative, and they're very capable. Um, and and to not assume that they won't understand it if you talk with them about it, right? And often for parents, it's overcoming their own fear about talking about it because we're taught as adults that talking about race or politics or religion is impolite or
Mhm.
inappropriate. And so we cascade those down to our kids, where kids have real questions, real thoughts, real concerns, real experiences. And so I think the place to start it is just to start with where you are at as an adult of what you know and believe. I don't think I could ever ask of any more of any other parent other than to start there.
Yeah.
But that also means that if you feel ill equipped to go, you know what, I know people are different and I do believe everybody's equal, but that's about all I know, is start there, but don't stop there. Keep having more conversations. Don't just assume that talking to your kid about bullying is a one-time conversation, or race or racism is a one-time conversation, right? Just like talking with your kids about sex isn't a one-time conversation. It should be an ongoing conversation when it's age appropriate, right? And so
Right.
having that first conversation becomes a start of more conversations. And for parents who don't know a lot and don't know what to say, great. Go do your homework. Go
Yeah.
find some materials. Go read some blogs online. Go read some books that help you get up to speed to sort of know a little bit more of what to say so that you become a learner alongside your kids. And in a lot of ways, all of our books function in that way, where we hope it's the first conversation of many and it gives parents a place to start. And we hope that they pile on after that with more ideas, thoughts, conversations, and questions, because kids will do that too. But we don't want every parent to feel like they have to be a PhD
Right.
and,
Right.
every topic to just talk to their kids. Like, just talk to your kids. No, you're not always going to get it perfect or right, but that's far better to start somewhere than to never start at all.
And I'm guilty of this as well, like hiding my own personal experiences from my children with different issues. Race, we had divorce my parents got divorced. There have been all kinds of issues that have come up, in our growing up, but hiding some of those, waiting for them to get older type thing. And we'd have that conversation then. Why is that a myth? Why is that kind of the wrong direction to really pursue?
Yeah, we have this idea that we're going to damage our kids if we have those conversations too early, right? And
Right,
so we wait till later when our kids can handle it. That's what we say to
right,
ourselves.
right.
The reality is the danger is actually the other way around. Having that conversation too late is very dangerous, right? Um, because they will have already formed their ideas, their opinions, their values. They will already have had experiences around that topic, right? That you haven't been able to participate in as a parent because you've decided that I'm not ready to talk about, or they're not ready, right? Even though they're already sort of ruminating on it, right? So I'm a big fan of having the conversation too early instead of too late, knowing that it's actually really hard to have the conversation too early. It'll
Yeah,
be uncomfortable for sure, but uncomfortable doesn't mean bad. And I'll give you an example. You know, we just did a book with Evelyn Yang on sexual abuse.
yeah. Mhm.
Every parent, that topic freaks them out. It's really hard to talk about, really uncomfortable, really hard to bring up. And when I start talking with their 4-year-old, their 5-year-old, their 6-year-old, they just go, whoa, no way. That's way too young. We'll start talking about it at 11, 12, 13, maybe, but probably not even then, because it's too difficult. It's too emotional. It's too, it'll break their innocence. And the reality is that um, starting the conversation then, when it'll actually matter most, when it'll mean most, when it'll have the greatest impact, which is preparing the kid to understand what abuse looks like, what it doesn't look like, what kind of voice you can give a kid to speak up in a certain situation, knowing that stranger danger is the most unlikely scenario in that situation, that actually having somebody who's a family member, who's a safe person, right? And with the statistic, like 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused sometime between 1 to 18, Then you go, you know, don't tell your kids to wear safety belts or helmets, but make sure you have that one conversation, because actually this is far more likely than any of those other scenarios. And yet we get it completely backwards when it comes to having that talk with our kids.
Okay, so break it down for us. So many moms listen to this show, so many parents listen to this show. What is a roadmap? Age one, you've already told us somewhere between 1 and 5, start talking racism, start having that conversation, opening that door. What other conversations should we be having maybe in the preschool and early elementary years? What conversations do we start in maybe later elementary years? What are ones that we really do need to reserve to middle school? High school is probably too late for most of it, but which ones do we reserve for later?
Look, I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert on all of this, not by any stretch. Here's what I fundamentally believe is that some conversations are forced to happen because an event happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa dies, right? An uncle gets cancer, or abuse has happened in the family, or mom or dad suffer from a mental illness, like depression or anxiety. And so it forces the conversation to the foreground, where it no longer really matters what age the kid is. It's present in their life, and that kid needs some way to make sense of it, right? So having the conversation becomes really important in that context, as opposed to pretending like it's not happening, because then kids form their own ideas about that thing if parents aren't able to step in and sort of give them guidance around it. For our topics, for our books, we think as soon as kids start school, which is really around 5 or 6,
Yeah.
having really substantive conversations with them around things like empathy, or social interaction, or race, or gender, or things like sexism become really important, in as much as they start to brush up against those things just being or outside of the home around other types of folks. Every family is going to be different about when they start these conversations, how they start these conversations. But I can promise you, and I'm a parent too, right? Is that the temptation for us as parents is always to start these conversations too late, not because our kids are uncomfortable with them, it's because we're uncomfortable with them. And in part, we have to get over that, because our kids really deserve better, and they deserve more out of us to lose our discomfort and to really engage with them in a meaningful way.
Oh my gosh, that's so well said. I'm curious, because you guys are putting out so many of these books every year. Can you tell what the top topics are, the ones that people are really grabbing for the most and really the most interested in? I'm curious to see what sort of is on children's minds, parents' minds right now, more so than other topics.
Yeah, sure. Well, so you can imagine it's 2020, right? So A Kid's Book About Racism is our best-selling book. After that are books like our one on failure, our book on anxiety, our book on empathy and gratitude. Our book on feminism has done really, really well. And then, newcomers like our book that's on pre-order right now, A Kid's Book About Addiction, is doing really well. What we found is that our average customer comes and buys 3 books because they see all the different conversations that can be started, the topics, and they sort of walk away with a handful of them to start those meaningful, important conversations with their kids. And it spans the gamut. And for us, we want to continue to discover authors and to write about these topics that we think matter most.
So I'm curious, is everything written by the same author, or do you have a range of people coming in to write about these topics?
Every book is by a different person. They are all from first person owned voices. That's really deeply important to us. They're not just academic experts. In some cases, they are. And for a topic like cancer, or for a topic like death, we actually have a bereavement expert who wrote on that topic. But all of the books come from a very personal place, where typically they are underrepresented individuals, or folks who are speaking from their own experience with that topic and a lifetime of experience there. And for us, there's no other way we would make any of these books. They have to come from a really, truly authentic place, so that kids, to some extent, there's an authority there, but there's also an authenticity there that they can relate to.
So I love this whole idea and this whole concept, and I know it's focused on books. I don't know what your plans are, and I apologize if I'm just uneducated, but is this a curriculum of any kind? Is this in the schools? Is this in, I can see this being used like, for a long time with my children too. I was like, why don't we have a curriculum that tackles each of these things in the school systems and begin those conversations? Many schools shy away for the same reason parents probably do too, right? They shy away from that because it's uncomfortable and you don't want to
Yeah.
represent one view and, all the other stuff that goes with that. But beyond the books, is there a platform for this that's looking into maybe school systems and other places where parents and kids can congregate and gather together?
So that's our hope is to continue to grow out the platform of books and to start to build curriculum around it. But what's been really amazing and beautiful is schools, libraries, therapists' office, nonprofits are purchasing these books to be a part of their collections and availables for students. I've heard of numerous teachers across the country using these books with their students to start these important conversations. I just got off the phone with an executive director of a nonprofit that has our books a part of their library, working with kids. So they've spread really far and wide, and our hope is to empower these educators with more tools to facilitate activities and discussions around the topics that our books address.
Do you have any, and again, totally selfish, totally selfish interest here. Do you have any on a kid's, I don't know how I would phrase it, but a kid's book about being from an immigrant family or from a Muslim immigrant family or any of those experiences? Because those can be pretty interesting experiences for sure.
Yeah, so we have a kid's book about immigration,
Okay.
but I love the idea of telling first-person stories about the immigrant experience, which
Yeah,
feels like a fundamentally different
yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
And for us, we love going niche. We love going into very specific communities, telling their stories, and not trying to think of everything broadly, knowing like it's really about representation, getting to
yeah,
represent those stories, not just for those owned communities and for
right. Right.
themselves, but for folks to be able to see and understand those communities who are outside of them.
Yeah, I think that would be something. There's so many stories within micro communities
Yeah.
where folks come into a situation and really as a child, I think it's more trauma than anything else, trying to navigate different worlds and trying to understand where you fall in the scheme of different values. And I think as parents, when we have the bandwidth and the time, then we're very patient with that. We have those conversations, but so many parents don't have bandwidth, right? They're
Yeah.
exhausted, they're tired. It's hard to have these convos. So if they had an easy resource, like what you're doing, I think it would be so helpful for all of them. Well, I love this. I love the concept. I love the books. I'm going to check out more than just a kid's book about racism for sure, because I think this is so important. And I really thank you for taking time out to join us today. If anybody listening or watching today wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way, a kidsbookabout.com is where all the books are available. There's an email sheet that they can reach out to us as our company. If folks want to email me directly, Jelani at a kidsbookabout.com. I love direct pitches and personal emails and thoughts and feedback on our books.
Fantastic. Well, keep up the great work. And I can't wait to check all these out. I think it's such important work for our times, especially, and for everybody else. Thank you for watching this episode of Superwoman Wellness. Remember, we're on Apple iTunes and Spotify as well. Don't forget to rate and review it and share it with your friends. I will see you guys next time.